Hello and welcome to Transitions, the show that will help you transition through your life. I'm your host, Chris Powell, along with my co-host, Emily Pierce. Say hi, Emily.
Hi.
There she is. And today we are talking to Barbara Hanson, author of Listen to the Cry of the Child. During painful circumstances and seasons of her life, God has brought Barbara J. Hanson, by the way, look that up as the author, through the valley of the shadow of death into the light of God's love and joy and glory. And seeking the courage to face her fears, she was carried out of the darkness into the place of becoming a victorious survivor. She's got quite a story, I might add. She was a victim of sexual abuse, infertility, and marriage betrayal. Barb has been called into an intense ministry with love and deep empathy for those who have been brutally and wounded by this world. And as you can tell, she's been through it. Barb is currently living in the Boston area with her husband. Her three grown sons and their families live nearby. Barb and her husband, Wayne, work with prisons. Listen to this. They work with prisons, drug rehabilitation programs, homeless shelters, inner city ministry, and Christian Motorcycle Association, and mentoring those recovering from their addictions. Barb, where do you find time to do all that? Anyway, we'll get to that. In a home-based nonprofit mission they have named his mission, they co-partner with other ministries to connect those with life-controlling problems. If you have a life-controlling problem, she may be a good person to talk to drug rehab programs, providing them with a church family and helping them re-enter society. As always, please like and follow the Transitions on Instagram and Facebook at Transitions Podcast Show. You can always shoot us an email at transitionspodcast7@gmail.com or visit our webpage and subscribe to get updates at transitionspodcast7.com. And please contribute to our host, WYTV7, at WYTV7.org. We look forward to hearing from you. Now, as I said, our guest today is Barbara Hanson. And Barbara, the book "Listen to the Cry of the Child" is and thank you for sending me a copy of that. That was such a
Yes.
great book. So tell us about this book and how it developed.
Okay. Can I hold it up and you can see it here in
Yep.
front of my face?
Yep.
Okay. This is my memoir written in 1 week after 38 years of secrets and bondage to abuse and to denial and to shame and blame. So God woke me up 3 nights in a row with the cover of my book. I knew it had to have a picture of me on the cover. That's me with a little tear coming down with a bear. And I didn't know what the rest of the book had to have on it. 3 nights, God said garbage. My youngest son, an art teacher in Nipmuc High School in the Massachusetts area, designed the book cover and the illustrations in my book. And God kept saying, garbage heap, garbage heap. I'm thinking, garbage heap? My life isn't garbage. Why, God? And God said, no, but have him put the child crying, screaming. She couldn't tell the secrets. The toy airplane that's in the corner, the baby carriage that's been tossed, and somebody threw a seed in that flower pot that's growing into the flower. The only thing in color in my book is red in the flower. And it's the clay pot. Someone tossed the seed in that flower pot that grew into a flower that's blossoming and blooming. I'm sharing my story globally, all over the world. And I knew that in God's still small voice. He said, child, there's still life in you. There's lots of life that you need to give others, and with your passion, and you need to be poured out like a drink offering to others with your passion and purpose to give hope to others just like you. And so in that pot, not only with the rose, there's thorns. We have to go sometimes go through the thorns in our life to get to the beauty and find the beauty out of ashes. So that's what my book is about. It's not just about sexual abuse, like Chris said. My husband and I have suffered tremendous losses with complex PTSD and traumas in our marriage and in our life, and we're still together. God's kept us together in spite of the losses. So don't feel sad for me at all, because he's using me to disturb those who are too complacent and too comfortable, and to comfort those who are disturbed,
Thank
including
you.
inmates.
Yes, Barbara, how long have you been married? You and your husband?
55 years.
50. Listen to this, folks. 55 years. And they've
That's a
gone,
miracle.
it is a miracle. They've gone through what some couples would crumble under, and God has led them through. So tell us a little of that story, how he guided you and protected your relationship, because you talked about abuse. You talked about a lot of things in there, and being uh, rejected, or things just didn't work right. So how did God protect? How did he bring you through that, transition you through that?
It was a long journey out. Obviously, I couldn't trust. The only one I trusted was my dad, who was a clergy, and my husband. And when the rug was pulled out from underneath my feet, when pornography and infidelity came into our marriage, I didn't know what to do. I've never seen that before. And marriage is a vow to your spouse and to God. And my spirit was crushed. And I didn't know it then, but my marriage died when that happened. And I maybe it was good that I didn't understand it all. I had no awareness of the sexual trauma that I'd gone through with incest with my grandfather. I don't like to say because I don't want to own him, but it was my mother's dad. And clergy sex abuse at a Bible camp as well, when I was 2 to 8 with a grandfather, and 11 and 12 at a Christian camp. The youth pastor molested me and others. So the pain with all those abuses, all the complex PTSD, the rug was jerked out from underneath my feet. My trust was shattered. And what happens, it produces a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, anxiety, fear, sadness. I had panic attacks. I walked in my sleep. As a little girl, I screamed in the middle of the night. My mother came in. She didn't know. I couldn't tell anybody. I had no words. And people think that sexual abuse is about sex. It is not. It can be defined as any sexual activity, verbal, visual, physical, psychological, engaged in without consent, exploiting a person in order to meet another's sexual or emotional needs, leading to power and control. So incest is one secret that holds you in the deepest chains, leading to guilt, confusion, and fear, creating a dungeon which it seems like you can't get out of. There's no escape. And
So let me ask you a question here.
yeah.
This was your husband that was wrapped up in pornography at the time. Is that right?
Yes, and I
Okay.
walked in on him with my brother's wife,
Okay.
and there were
All right.
others
Okay.
that, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, guys, I'm talking to you. Are you listening to this? Some have the addictions inside themselves so strong. And be honest with you, I've had that problem in the past. Okay.
Mhm.
And it's overwhelming. But folks, you need to get help. You need to get help. So, Barbara, how can men get help in that area, since your husband's come through that?
Well, I speak directly to the men as well, because there's so many men that are caught up in it. Porn has, and infidelities or any sexual addictions have no place in a marriage or in a relationship, period. The lusts of the eyes kill the soul. And you think nobody's going to see me. I'm going to go online, or I'm going to read this magazine. Nobody's watching. But you know what? God sees everything. He sees all of our sin. And when, I guess you'd ask yourself 2 questions. Would I look at this with my wife by my side? Or would I look at this knowing God is watching me, or looking outside my marriage? It's dishonesty, and it's an addiction. So there needs to be accountability. He owned up. It took us a long time. We went to a lot of different conferences, prison conferences, and secular and Christian abuse conferences, domestic violence conferences. And we both come out of different workshops. And he came out of a workshop with a workbook that talked about abuse, sexual abuse, and also pornography. And he learned a lot. So he'd bring these books home and he wouldn't read them. But we were having devotions together long after this happened. And I said, honey, I need to read these books with you so that I can understand you, so that I can understand myself and why I was codependent with drug dealers. That was my addiction. My link with drug addicts going in prison, I met them and they started writing me letters and started telling me they were abused sexually. And so I had that link, and they were male drug addicts. Some of the letters I threw away, they were too graphic, but one in particular was an inmate in the Massachusetts area that over an 8-year period, we brought him in and out of our home to get him a job. Well, actually to get him into rehab or detox. And he even detoxed in our home out of a crack house. So it was a world that I entered. I never intended to go in. It was a world that as a woman, we should be ministering to women and men to men. Men need accountability and they need somebody to tell. If they are tempted, they need to have somebody they can trust to call and say, pastor or sponsor or whoever it is, I'm struggling with this. Could you pray with me or for me?
Okay, perfect. Now, folks, the audience, men in particular, this grabs a large percentage of men in this country. Well, not just in this country, around the world. And so tell us about the prison ministry that you've got going.
Well, for an 8-year period, maybe 7 or 8 years, we went into a sex treatment center for men, for males. And at one point, my husband said, I should be in here. And I was kind of surprised that he admitted that because I didn't see him as an inmate. So I was asked to come in and preach in chapel. We took a team of 6. A few of them had addictions of their own. One man in particular was involved in pornography with our Christian biker group, Motorcyclist Association. And so I spoke in chapel. So what I would do, and I did this with my work as a humanitarian aid worker in the Philippines. We went there for 2 months gave away 95 or so of my books and my support group material. God brings beauty out of ashes. And I would weave my testimony with a sermon, like dead man walking, Lazarus coming out of the tomb. Jesus told his friends, loose him and let him go. And we need somebody that really understands these addictions, that understands us. And I'm glad that you're putting this out there today for men and women and children and teens. Yeah. Because at the age of 6, kids get involved in pornography. They go online and they find it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, we have got to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, and we'll return in a moment. It's so exciting to have you, Barbara. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Swing Into Their Dreams Foundation presents the Golf Tournament of the Year, raising scholarships for aspiring National Golf Club in Milton, Georgia. The inaugural HBCU Swing Into Their Dreams Charity Golf Tournament. Registration and gourmet continental breakfast begins at 8 a.m. and shotgun at 10 a.m. Award reception follows. Come enjoy a day of jazz, mimosa, cigars, cash bar, silent auction, and more. For more information, contact 770-686-7143. Dreams. Don't miss it.
Hello and welcome back. My name is Emily and I am your host. Thank you to our sponsor, and for those who just joining us, we are here with Barbara Hansen, author of Listen to the Cry of the Child. She is a sexual assault survivor and victims advocate. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you so much for having me here.
You. So you have a very inspiring story, and our listeners can actually like learn from you and get hope for what they're going through. So you could have chosen so many different paths in your life, but you chose to give back. At what point did you decide that you wanted to change? And how did you do it?
Well, God did it for me, actually. At the youth camp where I was molested by this 27-year-old clergy, I was a child of 11. He came back the next year and he did it again at 12, and he did it to some of my friends. So in 1998, I went back to the campground, and we have a cabin there. It wasn't like we weren't going back. We go there every year, but the memory hadn't surfaced because post-traumatic stress disorder is like what the vets suffer. Anxiety and flashbacks around many triggering events. You're frozen into silence. It's like amnesia. So I didn't recall, I didn't remember, I didn't understand, I didn't know how to heal. But this particular summer, in 1998, I went back to the campground and I saw a best friend that I hadn't seen in 27 years. She didn't have the courage to come back. She was a pastor's daughter, had gone through addictions of all sorts, had just gotten out of a drug rehab, was married and divorced, and had gone through the same abuse with this pastor. We connected like glue. She came back, we shared our stories, and she went back home. She told her pastor's wife, and we called the Christian Missionary Alliance headquarters in Colorado Springs. Now get this, 1 year prior to our going forward with a sex abuse case with now 4 of us, 3 more of my friends and myself, faced him in 1999, just a short time later. They hauled him in with several clergy and a well-known psychologist, and they brought him in the room, and I was in the room and walked in the room, and I was very timid and shy and couldn't talk hardly at all, and they were turning up the tape recorder, and I gave 1 hour and 3/4 of my testimony and exactly what he did and how he did it at the campgrounds. And then they brought the other women in one by one. So that was the beginning of my journey, to be able to face somebody from my past and confront him. And I chose the forgiveness path. When he said, "I don't know if you can find it in your heart to forgive me," he had been in complete denial up until that point. And I thought, you know what, I need to forgive him. And I did. 7 weeks later, as you'll read in my book, Listen to the Cry of the Child, which you can get from us at 508-473-1280. And all proceeds go to help survivors of violence. When he asked me to forgive him, I said, yes, I have to, because you need to run into recovery. You've hurt hundreds of kids. Sex offenders and coaches abusing their children. Sports Illustrated, 1999 issue of Sports Illustrated, molest 150 to 350 kids per perpetrator.
Wow.
Every 2 minutes, a child is molested. 1 out of 3 predators go on to molest. And 80% of all sexual abuse is incest. Scripture warns us in Leviticus 18:6, thou shalt not uncover thy nakedness with next of kin. So that was the beginning of my journey.
Wow, what a powerful testimony for women, for our women listeners. For those who are going through something now, for women that are struggling in a relationship, whether it be domestic violence, sexual violence, any type of trauma, what advice do you have for them based on your experiences?
They can get a lot of information and a lot of awareness and a lot of hope from my book. And I hope you both read it, because it's a book of hope, and it also has a lot of answers and awareness in my book, besides my whole life journey. And when I came home from that sex abuse case, I wrote it all down so that I wouldn't forget it, because that was very, very deep, very traumatic, very crippling for me. And the word that I would give somebody is, I was given by this inmate, heroin junkie, that we brought in and out of our house over an 8-year period. Before he went back to prison and before he overdosed on heroin on the streets of Boston in 1995, I believe, he gave us, or me, his New International Recovery Devotional Bible by Zondervan. It's an AA-based 12-step Bible. That Bible literally changed my life. As I sat at Jesus' feet and read that Bible for the very first time on addictions and all sorts of recovery, there's a scripture in Mark 5:25 about the woman that touched Jesus' garment. She just touched the hem of his garment. That's all we need. It's just a little tiny touch from Jesus. And she went to the doctors and pain medication and money spent, and she didn't have any hope. So as I sat at Jesus' feet, he began to touch me in ways I had not been touched before. I began to put myself in these scriptures. And the woman was shaking and fearful when the disciples scolded Jesus for healing her, probably on a Sabbath day. And Jesus said, "Go in peace, you're healed." And it wasn't instantaneously for me to be healed. It took a long journey out. It took a long time for me to trust my husband again after these things happened. And decades from being a victim to survivor to a thriver to a victorious survivor, I cried out to God to heal me and restore all that the locust has stolen and taken by crimes of my past. I was afflicted, but not crushed. I was perplexed, but not desolate. I was struck down, but not forsaken.
Barbara, thank you for sharing that. I've had a lot of trauma in my life, and I can tell you that one of the things that I didn't have was at one point was resources. For our listeners, for the women, what resources can you suggest for those that have been through trauma, complex PTSD?
Right. Well, order my book from us. My website is listentothecry.org. And my email is on there too. It's bobbyjoyhansen@juno.com. And I co-host a radio show, Stop Child Abuse Now, NAASCA, NAASCA. I'll be on the show tonight on the podcast. Any callers can call in my show and ask questions on any kind of addictions. We've had people call in that have one lady committed suicide shortly after she called the show. She was so emotionally distraught from what she'd gone through with child abuse. But we have survivors of all kinds call in the show. And I'll be on tonight. You can go on my website and find my information, or Facebook me and call in the show. Resources, I would say get the New International Recovery Devotional Bible. That changed my life forever. My book, and I teach a support group called Beauty Out of Ashes. This can be gotten from me as well. And it's a faith-based support group that helped me heal. I started teaching addicts and women, and then I started teaching some couples in my biker group. One man brought his wife in that was self-cutting. That's one of the addictions that she had from the trauma. And he told me I need to go through this course, and I didn't even know it. He said, I stuttered for years and my voice shut down. I sat next to a woman that was blind at a conference, and I said, were you always blind? And she said, no, I went blind. I never wanted to see my rapist. My father knocked on my door one day, and when he showed up, I went blind. This trauma caused my body to shut down. I couldn't start my period. And at age 16, my mother took me to the doctor to get hormone shots, and I couldn't conceive a child. So in my book, I wrote a chapter on the adoption of our firstborn son, Todd, that we conceived after many years of infertility.
Wow. Another powerful testimony that you have where people can listen and gain hope from it. So I'm going to have to pass it off to Chris. Chris, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Great questions, Emily, and great responses, Barbara. Now, we're coming to the close, so I want to be very clear, and please answer this very, very powerfully to the audience, Barbara, on giving hope to others. What can you say to that one point on hope in the time of desperation, on hope when you have no hope? I mean, when everything's falling apart, okay? So what is that one thing?
Everybody needs hope, especially in this year with COVID. And people are being shut down and shut in, sometimes with their abuser, and they don't have any hope. So I would tell any child or any adult or any teen that is listening today, if they're living with an abuser, they have to get hope and help and leave this man. Marriage counseling does not work, unfortunately, with an abuser. If he insists that you go to marriage counseling or a therapist with him, I suggest not doing that, because you're going to come home in the car with the abuser back to the same house and go through the battering that you have gone through before. So I prematurely forgave before I worked through my healing process. Grieving was a huge, huge part of my healing. And that's something we don't discuss. Grieving. I needed to grieve my losses. I needed to tell my husband what he did to me to harm me in order for us to stay together as a couple. And premature forgiveness keeps you stuck and hinders your healing process. Anger, for me, I didn't think I had it, but it was a natural response from being betrayed. And the anger spewed out at my dad when I finally told both my parents, not only about the clergy, because I was going through a sex abuse case with the Christian Missionary Alliance, but I couldn't tell them about my grandfather because that was too close to home. But when I told my mother, Mom, I know you've been abused by Grandpa. I know he wouldn't have just hurt me and my cousins, and an uncle was also a pedophile. I said, I know you've been hurt. And my father shut her down and said, no. This is his wife, a pastor and his wife, my mom and dad, and missionaries to Australia. And my daddy didn't know for 83 years. And finally she came out with it. And she said, yes, he did it to me too. Why didn't you tell me years ago? Well, I chose to choose my father to tell him first. And back in the day, they didn't have answers and awareness in seminary. So now the Christian Missionary Alliance, the first denomination to deal with child abuse, teaches this in seminary. And that's what young pastors need.
Good. Perfect. Now we have about 2.5 minutes. So very shortly, you got to keep this one short. Boundaries, setting boundaries in life. What does that mean?
I didn't know what a boundary was. A boundary is an invisible line that you either cross or the sex offender crosses or the batterer crosses to get to you. And I didn't have that. So I would try to find books about boundaries. I write about boundaries in my book. And that's something we really need. Yes.
We got to close it out. And I'm going to throw to Emily. Emily, you're going to close it out for us. Thank you, Barbara. You touched my heart. Emily, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, again. And you gave such a powerful testimony today of someone that's gone through so much adversity and come out on top. So,
Amen.
Barbara, if the guests want to contact you, how can they do that?
They can contact me through my phone number. They can get my book from me at 508-473-1280 or on my website, listentothecry.org. Or they can contact me with an email at Bobby Joy Hansen, BOBBIEJOYHANSEN at juno.com. And I will be happy to talk to somebody that's going through it or get them on my radio show. They can call in to NASCA and ask questions and get answers. I'm on the second Thursday of every month.
Well, thank you for that. I'm sure a lot of people will be contacting you. We want to remind our listeners, don't forget to follow on Facebook and Instagram at Transitions Podcast and visit our website, to subscribe to updates at transitionspodcast7.com. And you can always email us questions or feedback at transitionspodcast7@gmail.com. And please contribute to our host, our wonderful host, WYTV7 at WYTV7.org.
So thank you all for coming.
Thank
and we're
you.
wrapping it up. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.